You won't believe this, but there's a fascinating connection between two individuals who never met in life, yet it seems they were saying the very same thing, in completely different ways. Dolores Cannon, through the thousands of hypnotic regressions she conducted worldwide, uncovered patterns so consistent they're impossible to ignore. And Neville Goddard, decades before her, already proclaimed, "You are the creator of your reality." But what no one expected was that the accounts of Dolores's patients would, unknowingly, confirm what Neville preached with such conviction. Even about our next life. That's right. It's not about the past. It's about what's still to come, and how we can influence it right now with actions so simple hardly anyone takes them seriously. Have you ever stopped to think about that? That this life, which seems like the final act, might just be one of the rehearsals. That what you feel today, the anxieties, the regrets, the unfulfilled desires, could be the invisible building blocks of a future existence. Not as punishment or reward, but as continuity. Like a road being built with the steps you take now, even without knowing what's around the bend. Dolores heard this from hundreds of people in deep trance. They spoke of a space between lives, an interval where the soul reviews what it has experienced, chooses what it needs to develop, and even decides with whom it will reconnect. None of this was induced. The stories emerged spontaneously and had something in common. They all revealed a point of choice, an instant when, before returning to Earth, the soul decides what it needs to work on. And you know what's most curious? In many of these accounts, the choice was directly related to an unresolved emotional pattern from the previous life. Now think with me. Neville Goddard said that the external world is a mirror of our imagination. That everything we feel with intensity and repetition transforms into reality. For him, this was a law, and not just for this life. In his lesser-known lectures, there are passages where he suggests that consciousness does not die, it merely changes perspective, and that the states we cultivate today plant the seeds of what we will experience later. He didn't speak of reincarnation in the traditional sense, but he spoke of the continuity of consciousness, a continuity shaped by our internal states. When we combine this with Dolores's discoveries, what we see is almost shocking. Patients who described that on the spiritual plane, they were automatically drawn to future scenarios compatible with their most persistent emotional states. And not for punishment, but for resonance. Just as water seeks its own level, the soul seeks experiences that echo its inner self. This is where the true impact of this revelation comes in, because this changes everything. It's no longer just about imagining a better life to attract good things now. It's about understanding that every thought, every belief, every undigested emotion does not disappear with death. They continue. They form the outline of what we will be next. Imagine a soul that lived a life of resentment, that departed with grudges, judgments, feelings of inferiority, or guilt. In the deep hypnosis accounts, Dolores repeatedly heard that these souls sought to return in contexts that offered the chance to overcome these very feelings, sometimes with more challenges, sometimes with more love, depending on what the soul was ready to face. But the key was always the soul's current awareness, what it understood, accepted, and was willing to transform. Then you might ask yourself, so what do I do with this? The answer is straightforward. Everything. You can use this information to break patterns you don't want to carry forward. You can choose what to cultivate within yourself, knowing that it won't vanish when you leave. It goes with you. It will become you, again, in another story, with other people, perhaps even in another body, but the essence will be the same. And here's the most important point. Neville said that assuming the desired state was the most direct path to transformation. He didn't ask people to believe in the future. He asked them to live now, as if the future were already present. Dolores, on the other hand, discovered that the most conscious souls in the interlife were precisely those who had lived with this presence, who had learned to respond to life with responsibility and not just reactivity, who knew they were creating something even without fully understanding what. All of this forces us to pause and reflect. What are we creating today? What are we feeling repeatedly every day as if it's normal, but which, in truth, is shaping us from within? It's not enough to think positively for 5 minutes if the rest of the day is dominated by fear, criticism, or regret. The inner universe works like a silent magnet. It doesn't listen to what you say. It responds to what you are. Dolores revealed that in the deepest sessions, the most evolved souls were those who had understood this in life, who didn't wait for the grand explanation after death, who already lived with the sense that everything was connected. They didn't know the name for it, but they lived with intention, with awareness, with humility, and with choice. Perhaps that's why, despite appearing so different, Dolores and Neville were saying the same thing in different words. One through the direct experience of souls, the other through the exploration of mental and spiritual power. But both pointed in the same direction. You are not a victim of life. You are the invisible author of the next scene. And that scene begins to be written now, with the small decisions of your day, with what you choose to remember, repeat, forgive, with what you decide to let go of or carry. Nothing is by chance. And perhaps what you came looking for in this video isn't an answer, but permission. Permission to accept that yes, there is a purpose behind what still doesn't make sense, and that you don't have to wait for death to start anew. You can do it now, right here, as you listen to me. Because your next life, however distant it may seem, begins with a single thought. Imagine for a moment that you were standing before an immense blank canvas, and someone told you that everything you felt, thought, and believed in this life is being painted there, layer by layer. Not with brushes or paints, but with emotional impressions. Now imagine that this canvas doesn't disappear when you die. On the contrary, it's the reference your soul will use to choose the next setting. This is precisely the kind of revelation that many of Dolores Cannon's patients brought forth, even without ever having heard of Neville Goddard or laws of the mind. In a trance, these individuals reported that, in the moment between one life and another, they saw and felt with complete clarity what they had carried emotionally, as if everything was imprinted on their energy, and it was from this that the next journey emerged. Now stop and think. What are you imprinting on your inner canvas today? What emotions have repeated within you for years, perhaps decades? What stories do you tell yourself every time something goes wrong, or even when everything seems too good? Because, according to Neville, it's not events that create our reality but our internal states. He said that you could be in a dark, empty room and still imagine yourself in a palace, and the world would begin to change around you, to adjust to the inner image you hold with conviction. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? But when we cross-reference this with Dolores's regression accounts, the idea gains another dimension. People described in detail how their future lives were shaped not by the facts they had lived previously, but by the feelings that remained active within them, especially those that were denied, ignored, or fueled with anger and attachment. That's where things get deeper, because this takes us out of the comfortable position of believing that what's past is past. The truth is that what's past isn't past. If you haven't digested it, if you haven't understood it, if you haven't forgiven it, if you haven't let it go, everything remains invisibly, building what is to come. And this construction is not done by an external entity that judges or punishes. It is done by you. It's as Neville said, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. And in Dolores's accounts, this appears constantly. Souls who chose new experiences based not on conscious desires, but on deep needs for growth, healing, and balance. If you spent an entire life controlling everything, you might return to one where control is impossible. If you lived with fear of abandonment, you might return in a context where you'll learn to be emotionally self-sufficient, not as punishment, but as correction, as a process of inner balance that continues, life after life. And here arises the inevitable question, why doesn't anyone teach us this from an early age? Why do we grow up believing that life is a sequence of accidents, or worse, a test full of pitfalls? Perhaps because if we knew from the beginning that everything we feel matters and continues, we would live with more emotional responsibility. Perhaps we would choose our words, our reactions, our attachments more carefully. And perhaps this is precisely what you are beginning to realize now. Because if you've made it this far, It's because something within you already knows that life doesn't end where most people think it does. It continues. It changes form, but it continues under the same direction. Yours. And that changes the game. Because it means you can start shaping the next stage right now, not with big decisions, but with small internal gestures, choosing to forgive, releasing an old resentment, abandoning a victim role that no longer serves you. This is one of the simplest and most overlooked truths in the spiritual world. What you feel repeatedly becomes a pattern, and the pattern eventually becomes destiny. Neville called this the assumed state. He said you don't need to see to believe. You need to be to see, to truly feel with consistency the desired state, as if it were already real. Dolores, in turn, heard souls describing how, before they were born, they felt the kind of life they needed to live. It was as if they were magnetized by it, and this directly aligns with the idea that the universe responds to the frequency of what you are, not just what you desire. If you desire peace, but cultivate war within yourself, what do you think will happen? If you desire love but live in judgment, what kind of scenario will your soul choose to relive to learn? This is the part nobody likes to hear, but it needs to be said. Life isn't testing us, it's mirroring us. And when that mirror breaks, that is, when we die, it's not the end. It's just the moment when we look at the complete reflection of who we were, without masks, without excuses. And based on that reflection, we decide how to continue. There's no judge, there's no punishment, there's just you with yourself. And that's why both Neville and Dolores insist, each in their own way, that the present moment is sacred. Not because it's mystical, but because it's a seed. Everything you feel now is planting something, and that something doesn't end with your last breath. It blossoms in another story, with other chances, but always with you at the center of creation. Perhaps you're thinking, so it's all my fault? No, the word isn't fault. It's conscious responsibility. It's understanding that yes, you suffered. Yes, many things happened beyond your control. But now you know you can choose how to respond. And that choice, when made consistently, changes the soul's path. Dolores saw this happen in real time. People who, upon accessing a memory from another life, understood the pattern and decided to break it. Neville taught the same thing with different words. Change the internal state and the world will adjust. Deep down they're saying the same thing. You are the link between this life and the next. You are the silent creator of a future that doesn't yet exist, but which begins to take form every time you feel something intensely. And that's why it's not enough to watch this video as if it's just a spiritual curiosity. The proposition here is much deeper. It's an invitation to look within and ask yourself, what do I no longer want to carry with me? Perhaps it's a fear that has paralyzed you for decades, a resentment that has become part of your identity, a pattern of emotional, financial, or relational scarcity that you inherited but don't need to repeat. Whatever it is, it can be left here, at this point in the journey, because now you know, and someone who knows can no longer pretend they don't know. In many of her sessions, Dolores Cannon encountered something that, at first glance, seemed impossible to accept. Certain souls chose painful experiences for their next life, not out of masochism nor karma in the punitive sense many imagine, but out of a need for growth. Some wanted to develop compassion, others resilience. Some chose to be born into poverty to learn the value of simplicity, while others returned to difficult families to overcome old patterns of rejection. This confuses many people. After all, why would anyone choose to be born into suffering? But the answer was almost always there, clear. The soul sees the whole picture and understands that what is uncomfortable for the ego can be liberating for the spirit. Now remember Neville Goddard. He said that all true transformation requires an internal movement, sometimes painful, almost always uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. According to him, the old version of us needs to die so that a new one can be born. And this applies as much within a single lifetime as between lives. Are you starting to see how these two approaches, so seemingly distinct, fit together like pieces of the same puzzle? Dolores spoke with souls. Neville with the mind. And both pointed to a central point. Consciousness is sovereign. It is consciousness that sets the tone of the experience, not the environment, not others, not chance, but the way you see, feel, and respond to what you are living. And here's the most important detail, which many miss when trying to apply these teachings superficially. You don't change your next life by saying positive affirmations in front of a mirror for 2 minutes a day. You shape it with what you decide to face head-on. With the wounds you agree to investigate, even if it hurts. With the parts of yourself that were dormant, but which you now choose to listen to. Dolores reported impressive cases of patients who, when reliving memories from previous lives, cried, not for what they had suffered, but for realizing how they had carried unnecessary grudges for so long. They cried for having spent so much time blaming themselves, hiding, sabotaging themselves. And then came the most liberating part. By becoming aware of these patterns, they could finally leave them behind. It was as if in that moment the soul said, "Now I can choose differently." This is the big turning point. It's not just about knowing that the soul continues. It's about accepting that it is listening now, that everything you think, feel, and believe is being registered, not by an angel with a clipboard, but by your own essence. And it will use this information to decide what comes next. Neville called this mental sewing. He said, everything you accept as true imprints itself on your reality. And more than that, it remains in your vibration. There's no escaping this with ready-made formulas or superficial practices. What you are deep down, what you feel, even when no one is looking, that's what builds the bridge between now and what is to come. And here perhaps is the most challenging point of all. To transform the next life, you need the courage to transform this one. And we're not talking about changing jobs, addresses, or circles of friends. We're talking about changing the way you deal with your own thoughts, your silences, your memories, because they are what, day after day, drag you back into the same states. Neville said the secret wasn't to fight against these states, but to replace them. He taught to enter the desired state as one puts on a new garment, to feel it as if it were real, and then wait. Because, according to him, reality has no choice. It responds. Dolores, in her regressions, saw this happen on a larger scale. The soul, upon realizing it carried within itself a frequency of self-abandonment, attracted a life where it would need to develop self-esteem, sometimes in a difficult way, but always with purpose. This revelation completely changes how we view the cycles of life, because it shows us that nothing is lost, not the mistakes, not the failures, not the moments of deep pain. All of this can become material for transformation if you are willing to look with honesty. And even more importantly, you can start now. Because the soul's time is not linear. When you change something internally, the echo of that change reverberates forward and backward. Dolores reported cases where the healing of a pattern in this life had a retroactive impact on memories of past lives, as if the current understanding dissolved an old knot. Neville, without using reincarnation terms, said something similar when he stated that assuming a new state of being can reconfigure the past. Not what happened, but the meaning you give to what happened. And that changes everything. That's why, if you've made it this far, there's something within you ready for this shift. Perhaps you've spent your entire life waiting for a sign, an answer, a guarantee that all this is worthwhile. Maybe this video is that sign, or maybe not. Perhaps the sign is the discomfort you feel now, the urge to get up from your chair and do something, to take a deep breath and say, enough, I won't repeat this cycle anymore. Because now you understand that your soul is listening, and it no longer wants to carry unnecessary weight. It wants to fly light into the next chapter. It wants to build something new, but it can only do so with the material you provide now. And if that material is made of fear, bitterness, frozen anger, that's what it will carry, not as punishment, but as raw material. And perhaps that's why so many people feel stuck, even after so many books, courses, therapies. Because what's missing isn't more information, it's decision. The decision to stop negotiating with pain, to stop justifying patterns that should have been overcome long ago. The decision to live as one who knows they are writing the next life, even without seeing the paper. This requires courage, and it requires consistency. Neville said that persistence in the assumed state is the secret of success. Dolores would say that the soul's clarity in the interlife depends on the consciousness it developed in life. Do you see the connection? These aren't just pretty phrases. They are warnings. They are keys. And you hold one of those keys in your hand now. Now that you understand what's at stake, it's impossible to go back. You can no longer pretend that life is a random sequence of events. You can't say that everything ends when the body stops breathing. And most importantly, you can no longer postpone taking responsibility for what you feel every day. Because it is this invisible material you carry within that shapes your current reality and your next one. Dolores Cannon discovered this by listening to hundreds of souls who returned to tell what they saw, felt, and chose. Neville Goddard didn't wait for these confirmations. He felt it from within, like a visionary. That imagination is the creative power itself. Two distinct paths, one coming from the depths of the unconscious, the other from awakened consciousness. And yet, they meet at the same point. You create your next life through what you live in this one. Perhaps you're asking yourself, so how do I start? Is there a concrete step I can take now? Yes. And it's simpler than you imagine. Begin by observing, with sincerity, without judgment. Observe what you repeat, not just in thoughts, but in the emotions that arise automatically. Observe what you avoid feeling. Observe where you still victimize yourself, where you still expect the world to change for you to feel better, because that's where your power lies. Dolores said that the wisest souls she encountered in her sessions were not those who knew everything, but those who had accepted their responsibility, who no longer blamed others, who understood that every emotional choice was a vibrational signature, and that this signature drew their path. You don't need to understand everything now, nor solve everything at once, but you can make a choice today. Stop repeating the old unconscious pattern. Neville would say this is the equivalent of assuming a new state. He suggested a powerful exercise to imagine yourself at the desired end, to feel as if it were already real, and to sustain that feeling with faith day after day, not as a fantasy, but as a new identity. And here's the secret almost no one realizes. This exercise isn't just for changing your current reality, it is, in fact, soul training. It prepares you for the kind of consciousness you will carry forward. And the longer you remain in this new state, be it of peace, gratitude, abundance, or love, the more you shape the structure of your next life. Dolores reported that many souls returned to Earth with the mission of overcoming precisely what they couldn't sustain until the end in past lives, as if they were trying to learn to maintain balance, not just achieve it for brief moments. This is revealing, because it shows us that the soul's goal isn't to experience flashes of enlightenment. It's to consolidate states of consciousness. It's to make stable what was once only momentary, and this begins with small daily choices. For example, forgiving someone you've decided 1,000 times doesn't deserve forgiveness, not because the other person changes, but because you no longer want to carry that burden into another life. Or to be grateful for something you always took for granted, your health, a friend, a simple gesture. These are the silent trainings that prepare your soul to create with more freedom in the next story you will live. And make no mistake, no one is saying it's easy. Dolores witnessed firsthand the suffering of people who carried heavy traumas, not just from this life, but from many. And Neville never promised instant solutions. What both suggest, in their own ways, is that suffering ceases to be necessary when the lesson is understood. And understanding isn't rationalizing. It's accepting, feeling, processing, and choosing differently. Many souls in regressions recounted that they only managed to evolve after accepting that nothing external would change for them. It was at that point that they stopped running and began to walk with awareness. Neville would call this experiencing the state of the wish fulfilled. Dolores would call it alignment with the soul's plan. And perhaps you are at precisely that point now. A silent moment, perhaps invisible to others but decisive, because from here you can continue on autopilot, or you can begin to live as one who knows what they are building. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be true. That already changes everything. The soul doesn't expect sainthood, it expects consciousness and courage, because it takes courage to leave behind a version of yourself that has become too small. It's as Neville said, you must die to the old man before you are born to the new. And the death he spoke of wasn't physical. It was the end of the old pattern. It was the firm decision to no longer feed the same fears, the same excuses, the same cycles of suffering. Now look at yourself honestly. What is the pattern you've already recognized, but haven't yet managed to let go of? What is the pain that has become part of your identity, but which deep down you know you no longer need to carry? What version of you is ready to die, so that another can be born, lighter, more conscious, more true? These questions are not theoretical. They shape your destiny. They even shape what you will encounter on the other side. Dolores said that the most enlightened souls knew this, and that's why they lived with simplicity and profundity. They knew that every act of kindness was a brick in the construction of a lighter future existence. They knew that the way they treated others was, in fact, a way of treating themselves and their own evolutionary journey. And that's why this video isn't just information. It's a call, an invitation, a reminder that even if you are in your later years here, there is still much to create. And everything that is created now, even in silence, even if only within your heart, will accompany you. Death does not interrupt the soul. It merely reveals it. And when that moment comes, what do you want to find within yourself? Stored resentments, old guilts, or the deep feeling that you did your best with what you had, and above all chose to love, forgive, and grow until the very end? Perhaps you've never heard this before, so pay attention. You're not too old to change. You are exactly at the point where you can transform the most, because now you understand the value of every choice. Youth is in a hurry, but maturity has depth, and it is depth that shapes the soul. Dolores and Neville, each in their own way, left us this gift, the chance to see beyond the veil, to understand that everything you feel, everything you repeat, everything you don't resolve will be carried forward, but also that everything you heal, understand, and release makes space for a completely different next life, lighter, more coherent with what you have already learned. So before we close, take a deep breath. Feel what remains. There's no rush. Just choose calmly what you want to take with you, and what, finally, it's time to leave behind, because you have that power. It's not too late. It's never too late. If this video touched something in you, subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a button, it's a commitment to your own journey of consciousness. And if you know someone who is living a repetitive cycle, or who feels they no longer have time, send them this video, because sometimes all a soul needs is a reminder